Shabbat Shalom. This week's Torah portion is Mezora. Mezora has been translated as a leper, but actually the word that we have here in the Torah, in the Bible, in Hebrew, for leprosy, tzara'at, or for a leper, Mezora, it is not at all clear that this is referring to the illness that we know today as leprosy. Physicians have commented on the symptoms that are noted here in the Bible and have said these are not the symptoms of leprosy as we know them today. Clearly, the symptom of some kind of a skin disease, although we see in this week's portion that we're also talking about some kind of, I don't know if you call it a disease, some kind of affliction that also affects a house. The first association of this word Mezora with leper came with the first Greek translation of the Bible hundreds of years ago, and that was the name that they gave to it. So we have to leave this as a question mark. Many people, in fact, believe that this portion that we're talking about here doesn't discuss really a physical disease. Well, it has physical implications. It is not necessarily what we would define as a medical illness, but rather a spiritual illness that indeed the high priest is the one who is called upon to purify, to cure this person. Therefore, it is a spiritual illness, not a physical illness, although it has physical manifestations. Be that as it may, what I would like to focus on today is this issue of the leprosy, or the tzara'at, as we would call it, and many of the other issues that are the subject of this week's portion, all of which have to do with ritual purity. We talk about menstruation, we talk about various emissions, bodily emissions that create impurity, and further on in other portions we find other issues having to do with purity and impurity. In fact, we even have a whole section that is dealing with animals that one can eat and one cannot eat, and that is also discussed in the context of purity and impurity. We talk about forbidden sexual relations, and that is also talked about in the context of purity and impurity. So this concept of purity itself is very important in the Bible, certainly takes up a major portion of the book of Leviticus, but I would like to focus on primarily those physical problems that an individual will manifest that will render him impure. What does this mean? It's very difficult for us to understand in our modern way of life. We're used to thinking of spiritual imperfections or spiritual problems as something that emanates from the heart, from the mind. If we talk about being pure or impure, we usually think in terms of what our actions are. How are we as a person? Are we doing the right thing? And are we aspiring to purity, or are we doing the wrong thing? Are we mixing ourselves up in sin, and therefore we would see ourselves as impure? But clearly, when the Bible is talking about various physical manifestations of a pure or impure state and ways to purify it, there's no mention whatsoever of having to repent or having to change one's ways. So it is really not clear at all from the Bible itself whether there is really a connection between these physical issues that have some pure spiritual connection, surely, because it is a priest who is instructed in purity and how to purify this. But on the other hand, there is no connection here, at least, in the context of how one behaves or how moral you are or whatever in these particular issues. One of the theories that has been put forth about what this sort of purity means is its connection. There are actually a number of different physical states that will render someone impure, and in Jewish tradition, the chief of them all is death. Anyone who comes in contact with death is rendered immediately impure and must go through this purification process. And we see this mentioned later on, actually in the book of Numbers, in chapter 19, when we study the laws of the red heifer. The red heifer is something that is a way that a person who is impure can be purified. And the verse goes as follows: "A man that is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and lay them outside the camp in a clean place, and it shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel, for the water of sprinkling. It is a purification offering. And he that gathers the ashes of the heifer shall wash his clothes and be unclean till the evening. And it shall be to the children of Israel and to the stranger that sojourns among them for a statute forever. He that touches the dead body of any man shall be unclean 7 days." And then continues, "Whoever touches the dead body of any man that has died and purifies not himself, he defiles the tabernacle of the Lord, and that soul shall be cut off from Israel, because the water of sprinkling was not sprinkled upon him." So here we learn not only that there's an extra special sort of purification process that someone has to go through when they have encountered a dead body, but there is a particular instruction here. Someone who does not go through that particular purification process and enters the temple, he will be cut off. That is always a very severe punishment, and mentioned in only very few commandments. Therefore, our sages see the ultimate impurity is the contact with death. And many people, therefore, view some of these physical statuses of impurity that are described in our portion, such as these skin diseases, such as menstruation, or other bodily emissions that could be from illness or from whatever, that these have to have some relationship to death. And indeed, they are lesser levels of impurity, but they are still connected to death. And I think this is a very, very interesting way of looking at these laws of ritual purity. Indeed, the Bible itself, we say that the Bible is a book of life. It is a tree of life. The Bible itself, God says to us, and you should choose life, when he tells us we must obey the commandments that he has given to us here through the Bible, through the Torah. So the Bible then, and everything having to do with worshiping God and walking in his ways, is the path of life. Therefore, if we designate walking with God as the ultimate purity, and that in itself is life, then of course anything associated with death will be the ultimate impurity. Now, what is the connection of some of these things? If we talk about a skin disease, for example, whether or not it is actual leprosy as we know it today, it is certainly a degenerative disease, a skin disease, that indicates that perhaps a part of the skin has died, or there is an illness there. Of course, illness is always connected to death. Let's take a look at menstruation, for example. Menstruation means that a woman has not conceived, that her ovum, her egg, has been wasted. It hasn't died, of course, because it has never come to life, but it contains the potential for life that has been lost. Therefore, of course, it is connected in some way to death. We can talk about these various other emissions having to do with perhaps sexually transmitted diseases, or diseases having to do with procreation, with sexuality. These are also diseases that you can see as relating to the lack of procreation, or the inability to create a child, and or seed that was wasted, seed that was lost. All of this, of course, is connected to death. I think the message coming from that then is powerful indeed. And this is actually then many people ask, why then a woman who gives birth, why is she impure if she has actually produced the ultimate in life? She has given birth to a child. But on the other hand, from the woman's point of view, she has just separated from a living being that was inside of her. So to a certain degree, for her body, for her person, there is a separation that is akin to death. But of course, the result is a beautiful life, that newborn child. But there is also that element as well, the connection. And then there are people who have said that death is inevitable. to a human being. So therefore, at the moment that a person is born, they are essentially making that process towards death. It's another way of looking at it. But to me, the ultimate message here is a very exhilarating one indeed. Setting up the Bible as the ultimate closeness to God, as the ultimate in life. Anything that interferes with life in any way is impure. Anything, of course, by that same logic, that interferes with our ability to become close to God is impure as well, and something that we have to be very careful to stay away from. Shabbat Shalom from Samaria.